Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see so many of you here today for this webinar. I'm Deacon Ed Shoener from the Diocese of Scranton, and I'm also the president of the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers. And this is our first webinar that we'll be having a series of monthly webinars to help folks get started in mental health ministry. It's a relatively new ministry in the church, so there really is a need to share and network with each other and share ideas. So that's the purpose of these webinars, just to get to know what each other is doing in the ministry and to lay a foundation for this ministry in the broader church. And some of you may have seen this presentation. I've been doing this presentation for most of the time through the pandemic now on some of the basic principles of mental health ministry, and to get the concepts right so that we understand, at least in a general sense, what we're getting into as a way to lay the groundwork for some of the specific ministry activities that we'll be doing. As always, it's always good to start with the prayer. So let's start with the prayer to Saint Dymphna, who is the patron for those who live with a mental illness. Many of you may be familiar with her. She's an ancient Irish princess from the 7th century. I won't get into the whole story of Saint Dymphna, but I will call your attention to this more modern image of Dymphna holding the cross, clinging to the cross, looking from the dark into the light of Christ. And knowing that there's always hope. And we've actually, the artist and I, Louise Udovich actually put a little semicolon, for those of you that are familiar with the semicolon image, as a sign that, as a semicolon is a pause in a sentence, but then the sentence continues on. So too with mental illness and any other significant life, challenging life problem or event, there's always hope. So let us begin with prayer. Lord, we pray for those who have a mental illness. Help us understand that the way we talk about people with a mental illness affects the people themselves and how we treat the illness. So often, people who have a mental illness are known as their illness. People say that she is bipolar or he is schizophrenic. When we talk about mental illness, we should not use that phrase. People who have cancer are not cancer. Those with heart disease are not heart disease. Let us always remember that people with a mental illness are not the illness. They are beautiful creations of God. There is so much fear, ignorance, and hurtful attitudes that the people who suffer from mental illness needlessly suffer further. Help us to support and be compassionate to those with a mental illness every bit as much as we support those who suffer from any other illness. Grant courage to those for whom we pray and fill them with hope. If it is according to your divine will, grant them the recovery and cure they desire. Help them to remember you love them. They are never alone. Saint Dymphna, patron of those with a mental illness, pray for us. So, in thinking about starting a mental health ministry, I've come across three main concerns that people that live with a mental illness worry about when they approach the church and looking for support. One, they wonder if church leaders, I and all of you listening here, understand the experience of mental illness. They wonder, too, if they will be judged, and particularly in a negative way, because they somehow have a moral failing or a character flaw or something like that, because they live with a mental illness. And the third thing is their support in the church for people that live with a mental illness. Like I said, this is a relatively new ministry, so that's a good question to ask. If I'm living with schizophrenia or my child was just admitted to a psychiatric hospital, is there support in the church for me? Will they understand this? Will they judge me? So those are three things that I think it's important to follow as we think about this. So the first question, do church leaders understand their experience? Well, I think it's important from time to time to talk about our own experiences. And this is my daughter, Katie, who, she was a wonderful young woman, and we loved her dearly. And I'll show you a short video that our local medical college put together about Katie's story, which is, I think, is a wonderful way to introduce this topic of mental health ministry and start to understand, although this is, of course, in a secular medical school, I think it outlines a lot of good basic ideas that we can latch onto and use as we start our ministry. So let me show you this video about Katie, and I think it's important that we all tell our stories. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story with Katie, and then all of you can also, I suppose, while you're watching this, think about your own stories and your connection to mental health concerns. Katie growing up was a beautiful, wonderful, vibrant little girl almost from the get-go. She was born on Halloween. So Halloween in our house here was always a big day. She was just a wonderful, sweet girl, the best kid you could hope to want to raise. Scranton High School is where she went. She was the salutatorian at Scranton High School. She was the freshman sensation on her soccer team, president of her National Honor Society. She was dating boys, and it was a wonderful time in her life, at least to all outward appearances. Katie first experience with the mental illness probably started before we as parents knew. This mental illness was causing all sorts of anxieties for her, and she was cutting on her arm, and she would cover it with her bracelets. This is when she was a senior in high school. We didn't know what to make of it because we had no experience in mental illness. The response when she came back to high school was just this silence. I don't think anybody was deliberately being mean or setting us aside. It's just that our friends and family and other people at the school don't know what to say. It took us a long time to begin to understand what this mental illness is, what bipolar disorder is. We had never heard of it. She always took her medicine. She always took it seriously. It's a lot of hit or miss with these medicines, but she stuck in there for a long time. But finally, at the end, the last year, nothing was working. They were just throwing the medicine cabinet at her. She just became so terribly, terribly, painfully depressed, and she tried to pull herself out of it. The depression just overwhelmed her. She died from suicide in August 3rd, 2016. So I thought it would be good just to simply say this is what happened. She had a mental illness and she died from suicide, but to recognize it as an illness, not as a character flaw or a moral failing or anything like that. It apparently spoke to what a lot of people with mental illness experience, and this obituary went viral.
This is a unique medical school because no other medical school has made behavioral health, in collaboration with its community, its #1 priority.
The Behavioral Health Initiative is a wonderful initiative that we at the Katie Foundation have been supporting because it brings the treatment of mental illness into the community.
If you think about many of these issues and problems as being brain disorders, biologically based, strong genetic factors, then that's going to help remove the stigma that's been associated with having behavioral health problems, psychiatric problems.
There's so many misconceptions about people that have a mental illness. Mental illness is an illness like all the other illnesses that doctors treat, and it needs to be understood that way.
The goals of the curriculum would be provide the tools and the awareness and the expertise to help integrate behavioral health into the physical healthcare world so that it is seamless and it is just a matter of fact that those two problems will be addressed together.
And that's what I like about the BHI. It'll be integrating the care of people with a mental illness into the broader community in many, many different ways, and that's a great thing. So that's my story. I'm sure many of you, probably all of you, have your own stories of either a loved one or someone close to you that struggled with a mental illness, perhaps died by suicide, or perhaps yourselves are struggling with an illness yourself. Like many of us, it could be both. But it's important. It highlights the need to tell our stories. And as it said in the video, Katie's obituary went viral. I mean, neither Katie or I are celebrities, of course. We simply wrote it to inform our local community here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, about the Katie had an illness, and she died by suicide, to be quite open about it, but not to be defined by that, and that she was a beautiful creation of God. Basically, Katie's obituary was the prayer to Saint Dymphna that we prayed at the beginning of this, a short, simple statement about looking at people and realizing that people with mental illnesses are created in the image and likeness of God, like all of us, and to not define them by their illness. Well, that apparently spoke to the fears and concerns and realities that people with a mental illness live with, and it got widely shared and went viral. These are some of the things that we heard back. We got thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of responses. But these are a couple main points, and it's good to keep these in mind as we set up a mental health ministry. We need more people discussing the realities of struggling with a mental illness. It's an illness. It can be as difficult, painful, and terminal as any other serious physical illness. And I've never understood, I heard this so many times from so many people, I never understood why people treat those with a mental illness different than people with a physical illness. And hopefully God is using this for a good divine purpose, to educate others to be compassionate. Don't be quick to judge, because it can happen to you or anyone. And that is so true, because mental illness does affect just about every family, if not the immediate family, certainly close extended family. And it's, as we'll get into it a little bit later on, it's a widespread illness, and there's just a real need to be open about this and being able to discuss this both in our community and in our church community. I think the Holy Spirit's moving, and there's a need to bring this into the church and throw open the doors of the church so that people who live with a mental illness and their families feel welcome and supported. And that's what this ministry is all about. The other thing, speaking of talking about mental illness and being open about it, I think many of you may be aware of this, that Pope Francis, his prayer intention for November, and the popes have been having prayer intentions since the early 1800s, from what I understand, was for people that live with a mental illness, in this particular case, depression. And I was thrilled when the Vatican Media Office contacted us at the association in September to help them with the development of this video, some of the ancillary support materials. It's wonderful to see the Pope and the Vatican talking about this and being open about it. His prayer intention for November was for people who suffer from depression. We pray that people who suffer from depression or burnout will find support and a light that opens them up to life. It's a wonderful little phrase, a light that opens them up to life. So I encourage you to go to the Pope Video or the Pope Worldwide Prayer Network and take a look at the video. It's a nice little 2-minute video and some other support materials. I wrote a couple articles for Vatican News on Katie and saints that live with mental illness, but it's just wonderful to see that the Universal Church out of the Vatican is talking about this. And, that's what we need to do, is at least get the conversation started. And then slowly those of us that are interested in the ministry can bring this into the life of the church more closely through our parishes. So the topic for today is the principles of Catholic mental health ministry. And a good document that I lean on to discuss these basic principles is this document, Hope and Healing. It's a document put out by the California Conference of Catholic Bishops in 2018. And I would encourage all of you to, download this. It's not that long. It's not that difficult to read. It's a very readable document. It's in a number of different languages. And it lays out these principles in like 11 or 12 pages. And this main statement here is pastors and bishops, and I would say Catholic leaders too, we understand that mental health is a critical component of well-being. Therefore, ministering to those who suffer from mental illness is an essential part of the pastoral care of the church. So this isn't some sort of little unique niche ministry that gets done here and there. It's an essential part of the pastoral care of the church. And that's wonderful to see that the bishops from this large state in the United States recognize this, and I see this growing and spreading beyond it. beyond California. So let's take a look at these basic principles and that can underlie the ministry that we'll be starting in our own parishes. So the first principle is this: Christ calls us to attend to those who suffer from mental illness and provide hope and healing. And those are the two key words. We provide hope and healing. We're not doctors. We're not mental health care professionals. We don't heal mental illness. We don't do anything like that. We're ministers that provide hope and healing. And in the circle there is a wonderful quote from a fellow named Dr. John Swinton, who writes extensively on mental illness and the faith. The church is not called to become a community of psychiatrists. It's called to become a community of persistent and patient love. And our primary task, is to love and heal without the demand for a cure. Is someone saying my microphone is muted? Let me see here. I'm getting some people raising their hands saying I'm muted. Is everyone having that experience? Okay, thanks. I see you do. Okay, thanks. Very good, thanks. So, as I was saying, the primary task of the church is to love and heal without the demand for a cure. And I work in a Central City parish here in Scranton, and occasionally we have people come in off the street who might not, have the best hygiene, who might be talking to themselves, who maybe had a little bit more to drink than they should have before they came into the church, but they're still behaving reasonably well. We should welcome them into the church. Now, that might be the more extreme side of things, but they should be welcome into the church just as much as we should be welcoming into the church maybe the college professor who has a serious mental illness but doesn't want people to know about it. We should just welcome them into the church no matter how they are, without demanding a cure, and to say that it is good that you exist. Because I tell you, all too often, people who live with a mental illness wonder if that's true, whether or not it's good that they exist. Sadly, that is what brings people to the brink and even over the edge of suicide. But even if they aren't suicidal, so many people who live with these illnesses wonder if it's good that they exist. And they ask this existential question, where is God in the midst of this? Does God love me? So that is the first principle, is just to be open and loving and not demanding that anyone get a cure or just accept them. We don't require that people come in who have cancer, get rid of their cancer before they come into the church, or diabetes or multiple sclerosis. So too with mental illness, we recognize it an illness and welcome them and love them the way they are. The second principle is to understand that the scope and burden of mental illness in our society is enormous. In the United States, at least, the numbers that you see quite a bit is that 1 in 5 or 20% of us at any one time live with some sort of diagnosable mental health condition. And over the course of a lifetime, over about 50% of us will live with it. So if you're not living with a mental illness yourself, you know someone that is. I, for example, live with mild to moderate depression. I know many people with anxiety and other sort of what you would call more common illnesses. And then there are, of course, the more serious illnesses like schizophrenia that affects, 6-7% of the general population. But many of us live with these illnesses. And so if you're standing there and looking out across your congregation in any given morning, about 20% of the people in the pews have something that they're dealing with, or that someone that they love is dealing with it. And the little box on the right there, on the lower hand right, it's important to realize that half of those people will develop these conditions at a very early age, by the age of 14. So it's something that comes on early in life, and it's, given the state of medical care right now, it's a chronic illness. It generally does not go away. You can live in recovery, as the term is used, and manage it. Many people can through medical care, but sadly, many people, the medical care is not anywhere near what it needs to be. So not everyone can manage it effectively, but everyone can have hope, and they can at least live a healthy life that has meaning. So the third principle: those suffering from mental illness should not be stigmatized or judged. Mental illness remains poorly understood even by clergy and others in position of influence. I'll readily admit when I was in, and I think when I was in formation in the Deacon program, we didn't get much, if any, on mental illness. We got a little bit, but not much. My understanding is in most seminaries and the clergy formation programs, that's just the reality of it, is that we have not gotten a lot of information on mental illnesses. So one of the things we need to do as clergy and as leaders within the church, lay leaders, is increase our literacy, at least so we have a basic understanding what these illnesses are. If someone discloses to us that they're living with depression or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, at least have some sense of what the difference of these illnesses is. So one good program to take, maybe many of you have taken this, is mental health first aid. It's a global. It's a course that's offered around the globe, at least in English-speaking countries, and I think it's offered in Spanish and maybe a couple other languages now. It's a good basic primer on what mental illness is, and also it gives you the tools to respond to crisis situations to help people get to the care they need. So if someone's suicidal or they're experiencing psychosis, it gives you the confidence to get them to a hospital or get them to a mental health care professional that can help them through this crisis. Or even if the mental illness is just starting to come on, it gives you some tips and ideas on how to talk to people as they're starting to experience a mental illness. Similar to, physical first aid. If someone fell and broke their leg, we of course wouldn't try to repair the broken leg, but we would at least want to have confidence and be able to know what to do to safely get them to a hospital. It's similar with mental health first aid. It gives that's kind of basic confidence to do those sort of things. And as Pope Francis said here, he's been talking about this quite a bit in 2020, mental health. This is a quote from a conference that he attended in Italy for mental health professionals in the middle of the summer. And he said this: we need to fully overcome the stigma with which mental health illness has often been branded, ensure that a culture of community prevails over the mentality of rejection. So again, it's just wonderful that our Pope's talking about this and recognizing the need that we need to have a culture of community where everyone feels welcome and understood by the leaders and the clergy of the church and in our parishes in particular. Our fourth principle, and I think this is an important principle that I just want to spend a couple minutes on, is because this comes up all the time, is the difference between mental health ministry and mental health treatment. The principle is this: the church, healthcare professionals, and scientific researchers should work together to improve mental health care. But as the quote there on the left from the Hope and Healing document says, psychiatry and mental health professionals have their place, but their tasks are different, although complementary from the tasks of the church. And those of us that are involved with mental health ministry need to constantly remember this, that we are not mental health care professionals, and that's not what we're called to do. If you look on the left there under the mental health ministry column, our task is accompaniment, to journey with others as they experience God. You hear Pope Francis use that word a lot, to accompany people, and that's what we do. Whereas a mental health professional, on the other hand, on the right-hand side there, they diagnose and come up with a treatment plan to try to treat the symptoms. And the goal of the treatment is to address the symptoms and treat the disorder, reduce the impacts of it on a person's life, and as best as possible, bring them into recovery and make their mental health as healthy as it can possibly be. Our goal, instead, on the second item there, is that our goal is faith-based and God-centered. It's not based on medical care without the direct implementation of psychological interventions. So our goal is to constantly remind people that live with these conditions that they're loved by God and that their faith can support them in this journey. As a mental health minister, under point 3 there, we can provide the spiritual and social support. So, for example, as I'll get into a little bit later on, we can have spiritual support group meetings. We can integrate people that live with a mental illness into the broader life of the church and give them the social connection that they need freely. We do this freely as volunteers, as part of being Christian, being, in our case, Catholic Christian, being it's part of what God's calling us to do. Whereas a mental health professional, under item 3 there, Many may involve several professionals to guide the treatment and monitor the medication and the medical concerns. Someone with mental illness once remarked to me, and is that it's good that they can come and talk to those as ministers in the church and people that support this ministry, because they are so used to only talking to people who are paid to talk to them. Now, it's wonderful that there's psychologists and therapists and all that who are out there, but it's their job to talk to them now, and it's what they do for a living, and that's great. But as you can imagine, we all need more than that. We need to know that we're in a community. We need to know that we're loved by other people. And that's what we provide as mental health ministers, is that reassurance that they're loved. And that's different than what a professional does. We consider, under item 4 there, ministry considers the all-important existential questions to seek God's will and presence during this hardship. This question, the oldest book in the Bible is Job. This question of suffering. Where is God in the midst of this? This comes up all the time. Why did God allow me to live with depression? Why do I have these disordered thoughts? Why am I suicidal? These are all questions that people who live with mental illnesses need to feel free and able to talk about openly. So we do, in fact, do this in our support group meetings. We can do this in other environments within the church, is to ask these existential questions. Whereas under item 4 on the right there with mental health professionals, that's not always the case. That's usually not a question that a therapist would, and I would argue that maybe it's not a question that a therapist should be delving into, is where's God in the presence of this, and where is God in all of the suffering? That is something that someone should be sent to their faith community to try to discuss and understand what that is. But I'm sure all of you know the Catholic Church, one of the main reasons that Christ came into the world was to answer that question. Where are you, Lord, in the midst of all of this suffering? So that's an important thing that we can do in this ministry. And to understand our limitations under item 5 there for both of us, the ministers and mental health care professionals. Ministry has its limitations, but we're God-centered. I mean, our main limitation is to remember we are not mental health care professionals, and we're not here to treat the illness. Just like we wouldn't try to treat cancer or any other physical illness, we're not here to treat mental health illnesses. We're here to accompany people and support them, and like the Good Samaritan, maybe get them to the place that they need to go to get care, and that is an important part of our ministry, but we're not the ones to provide that care. And then mental health professionals, of course, they have their limits. The limits of the science of mental illness in itself is limiting, but also insurances. And any of you that have come up against the mental health care medical system knows probably all too well the limitations that exist there. But we both need to recognize our limitations. So I just repeat it over and over again. We provide accompaniment and ministry, and we leave the medical care, and we encourage people to get the mental health treatment. And one of the big things we do is get over the self-stigmatization. A lot of people, particularly, unfortunately Catholics to a large extent, feel as though that if they could pray their way out of this, they could, if they could spend more time in church or maybe go to confessions or whatever, avail themselves of the sacraments, that somehow it's because they aren't a good Catholic that they're dealing with these anxiety and depressions and other illnesses. And I think a lot of times those in this ministry can reassure them that you're a good Catholic if you go get mental health care. The mental health care professionals are a gift from God, and it's good that if you go get this, and we'll be with them as they accompany them through their mental health care. But there is absolutely nothing wrong for a good, holy Catholic to go see a therapist or a counselor or take medicines for your psychiatric disorders. These are all good things. They're a gift from God, and we can work together. The professionals and the ministers can work together on this. So I think this is one of the most important slides or concepts that I can offer you today about mental health ministry. So principle 5, we must meet and attend to those in need where they are, which our advocacy through the association is in parishes and in local communities. To reach those who struggle with a mental illness, we need to bolster the role of parish communities and also move beyond our zone of comfort and familiarity, because this is a new ministry in the parishes to a large extent. People don't know if they have the confidence or abilities to do this. It can be readily admit, it can be an uncomfortable ministry at times. It's not. I like to joke at this time of the year, it's not the same as teaching, CCD to second graders and coloring nativity scenes. It can be a very challenging ministry at times. It's more like sometimes going into the tomb with Christ. We can be entered into these very holy places as people struggle with these illnesses, but they can also be very dark places. But we can bring the light of Christ into their lives through these parish-based mental health ministries. I'll get into it a little bit here now about the core idea behind this ministry is to set up parish or local mental health ministry teams. You don't ever want to try to go this alone. You should always try to have at least 3 people on a team with you, supporting you as you go through this ministry. It can be a difficult ministry. You need backup. You need support. So it's important to form a team within your parish community. There's liturgical considerations. We can work into the liturgical life of the church. There are many saints that we can look to that struggle with mental illnesses and mental health concerns. Most recently, Saint Oscar Romero, was canonized recently, in the 20th century saint. He's one of the saints that were around or living during the time of modern psychiatric care, and he was actually diagnosed with OCD and was obsessive compulsive disorder, and he was undergoing mental health care and mental health treatment. So even the saints, and there's lots of speculations about the other saints having all sorts of other disorders, and I'm sure God can work through everything, and can certainly work through mental illnesses and raise people to live very holy lives, and they can be an inspiration to people that live with these illnesses. So a little bit about what we can do in this ministry to help create these mental health ministry teams and build up a ministry within your parish. The association has partnered with the University of San Diego through the Catholic Institute of Mental Health Ministry, sort of an academic arm of this ministry, so to speak, to develop a handbook. We have a short handbook. If those of you that are members of the association would have got access to a PDF copy of this handbook. It's a short handbook of describing guidelines for implementing a parish mental health ministry, going through education, forming the mental health ministry team, and a covenant within your parish to be committed to doing this, welcome people into the ministry, and come up with various ways to support people who live with these illnesses within your parish community. And that could vary from parish to parish depending on the needs. So for example, what is a good support program in Scranton would differ from, say, a rural community where there's a parish in Rapid City, South Dakota. The needs of the upper Great Plains and reservations and other situations such as that are very different from an urban area in the Northeast United States. There's people that are looking at ministries in South Africa and Moldova and other parts of the world. So certainly the exact ways you would do this would have to be thought through as to how you do a ministry within your local community setting. And then advocate within the broader church for people with a mental illness to continue to open the church up. And then in any good planning process, you continue to go back around and evaluate and adjust and improve things as you go through this. So it's important to go through this and think through this as to exactly how you want to do this. One of the things I would encourage you to do, particularly as a member of the association, is we have a online course through the University of San Diego that basically takes that manual and guides you through it, and then you're a series of asynchronous. You don't have to be there at a particular time. You can log in whenever you want. And then your final exam, such as it is a mental health ministry plan for your parish. So this is not an academically rigorous course. If you haven't been to school in a long time, it's still something I think you would feel comfortable doing. It's as you can see here in this slide, the next open period for it is in March to April, and you would go through this online, like I said, and if you're a member of the association, we'll pay for you to take this. And the other question I get is that it's not cheating if you join with other people in your mental health ministry team and all submit the final exam together. That would not be cheating if you all look at each other. In fact, if anything, we would encourage you to work together and come up with a plan that would be part of your parish or your diocese or whatever group you're involved with. So we really encourage you to do this take this course as a team, and then all of you work together to come up with a mental health ministry plan for your parish. Wendell Callahan, Dr. Wendell Callahan is the professor, and I know Wendell quite well. He has no trouble with that. So I would really encourage you to take that course. Well, there'll be other information coming out through emails and newsletters about what you have to do to sign up for it. But if you Google Introduction to Catholic Mental Health Ministry, you'll find it, and you can read more about it. I wouldn't don't pay if you go to the page. Don't pay for the course. Contact us first, and we'll make arrangements for you for your tuition to be covered through the association. So that's one thing I would encourage you to do. The other thing I would encourage you to do is think about taking a look at the Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries page. They're out of Vancouver, Canada. They've been around for a couple years now. They developed a great program called the Sanctuary Course for Catholics. It's on Formed. If any of you have access to Formed, the Catholic media program or channel, I guess maybe that's what it would be called. It's eight parts. It's like 20 or so minutes. Each video is the length of each video, and they also have a fully developed course if you want to use this in your parish as a way to start a discussion within your parish about mental health. It's not so much. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't necessarily say this is how you should do things, but it opens up the discussion about mental health and mental illness. And as I'm sure all of you are very well aware, just getting that conversation going can sometimes be difficult. So this is a top production quality video series, very well thought out, very theologically correct. A number of bishops and theologians also participate in this, as well as people that live with lived experiences talk about their experience of living with a mental illness and how their faith has impacted them and how their faith has supported them. So Sanctuary Course for Catholics, check it out. Go to their webpage. I think all they want from you is your email address and get on their mailing list, but there's no fee or dollar charge to go take a look at this. And the sixth principle, which is a tough principle, some people have a hard time or reluctant to want to talk about this, but the principle is those impacted by suicide need our compassionate response. If today's a typical day in the United States, at least somewhere between 125 and 130 people today will die by suicide in the United States. Globally, about 800,000 or so people die per year from suicide across the globe. So it is a way, unfortunately, in the United States, it's one of the top 10 ways of causes of death in the United States, and it's something we have to be able to talk about because it happens in every Catholic community, every parish. These are two books that I, along with Auxiliary Bishop John Dolan from San Diego, edited. From earlier in the video, my daughter died by suicide. Auxiliary Bishop Dolan had two siblings, a brother and a sister, along with a brother-in-law, die by suicide. So God bless him and his family. Just when you think, whenever you think you've got things bad or tough, you run into someone else who seems to have things tougher than you. So he's lost 3 close family members to suicide, and he openly talks about this and supports people. These books were written to provide some pastoral guidance on the teaching of the church on suicide. And also the small book, When a Loved One Dies by Suicide, is a book that you can give out to people when they've lost someone to suicide. It's written in 9 chapters, like a novena. And at the end of each chapter, there is a series of prayers to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and Mary, to let people just sort of sit there in their grief and to understand that our triune God and Mary is with them as in their grief and will accompany them, and so that they can have a deeper understanding of what happened to their loved one and a greater sense of hope that their loved one has not disappeared. Whenever anyone dies, and even when someone dies by suicide, it's not like they've disappeared into the ether. They still very much exist and are loved by God. And that's what these books do for people that live with the death or grieving the death of someone by suicide, to give them comfort, hope, and healing, but also for those of us who are in ministry to give us some ideas on how, maybe for those of you that preach, to preach the homily at a funeral when there's a death by suicide. And I would say be very careful what you say, and remember that the funeral is to give hope and healing, and perhaps is not the best time. Usually it's not the best time to talk about the church's teaching. We can do that at other times, talk about what the church teaches on suicide. And the book also talks about how to work this into youth ministry and other parish-based mental health ministries. So you might want to consider looking at these books, and they're published by Ave Maria Press, very well respected and good Catholic publishing house. And this again, Pope Francis, just this last October, on October 10th, World Mental Health Day. This was the prayer that he offered at the Angelus on those days. I would like to remember our brothers and sisters affected by mental disorders, and also the victims, often young, of suicide. Let us pray for them and their families so that they are not left alone or discriminated against, but welcomed and supported. He actually said the word suicide. Believe me, I've searched papal statements and church statements. There's not a whole lot of folks talking about suicide. It's wonderful to see that our Pope is talking about this and can lead us feeling more comfortable to talk about it in our own parish communities. So it's wonderful that Pope has a couple of times this year has been talking about mental illness and suicide-related issues. So that's all well and good. I'm sure you're thinking that these principles are good, and it's good that we get grounded in these principles and have a clear understanding of what mental health ministry is all about. But what would a parish mental health ministry look like? Oh, I see a typo there. I got ministry typed twice. I'll have to fix that on the slide at some point. There's no one prescriptive way, but this would be a series of things that a robust mental health ministry in a parish would look like. So, like I said earlier, an important thing is to form a parish-based mental health ministry team with at least 3 people, preferably more, that you can support each other and share the work and that sort of thing. So get at least 3 people involved with this ministry, and then get some basic training. Take a mental health first aid course or some other basic training. Again, you don't have to be a professional. In fact, it's probably better you're not, in a lot of ways, that you're not a professional, but that you have a burning desire to love Christ and to bring the love of Christ in the lives of people that live with a mental illness. Get some information, like take the Introduction to Mental Health Ministry course that I just described online, and then prepare a simple ministry plan and give it to your pastor. It's very important that you have the approval of your pastor within your parish or your bishop. If it's a diocesan-wide ministry, this is not a ministry that you run off and sort of do it on your own. This is clearly a ministry that's bound closely to the church and the church's ministers. So it's important that we get the support. Maybe the pastor doesn't have to do it. The pastor's got lots to do. So I'm not saying that you have to go to your pastor and say, Father, please help me run this ministry. That's not what I'm suggesting at all, but it is important. It'd be great if the pastor does want to get deeply involved, but quite often it's not possible. But it's at a minimum, you want his support and acknowledgement of this ministry. And then once you all have things in place, introduce the topic into the parish. It's a new ministry. So if you go to our webpage, you'll see a description of a 5-part series, Mental Illness with Grace, to sort of introduce this into the parish through a series of meetings and start to discuss what the ministry could look like within your parish, or use the Sanctuary course, which has accompanying discussion materials that can help to start to form an idea of what the ministry might look like in your parish, but to have some sort of introductory program to let folks know that this that this program is being introduced into your parish. Number 5 there, work with your parish staff to work it into the bulletins, into the intercessions. In the intercessions, we pray for all sorts of things, which is great, but we should also, from time to time, pray for people that live with mental illnesses, and specifically pray for people that live with depression and anxiety and schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. I mean, name it, and put it right out there. During, here in the U.S., Suicide Awareness Month is in September. Specifically pray for people that are experiencing suicidal ideation or thinking about suicide, and pray for people that have died by suicide, and put it in the intercessions. And I would say for those of us that preach, work it into the preaching, into the homilies from time to time. Another thing we can do is organize special masses. The feast day for St. Dymphna is in the middle of May, May 15th. Some places around the do have a special St. Dymphna Mass for people that live with mental illnesses. Suicide Remembrance Mass. Bishop Dolan does that in San Diego. There's a couple other places around the country that have a special Mass, an annual Mass, where people can come and grieve in a special way within the church. A remembrance Mass for people that have died by suicide. We'll be starting one here in Scranton this fall, and I know a handful of other places around the country and around the world do this. And even healing Masses. Make sure when you have a healing Mass, that you invite people that live with a mental illness to be anointed. It doesn't have to be just physical illnesses, but specifically invite people that are living with these illnesses to a healing Mass. One of the things that we do in Scranton, and a number of places do it around the country, is facilitate small faith sharing groups for people that live with these illnesses and for their loved ones. It's a place where they can come and openly talk about their mental illness and talk about where God is in the midst of this. Because, so often people are not comfortable doing that. So, for example, at our support group meetings, we open with a prayer. Typically to St. Dymphna, we have some other prayer cards. St. John of God is another patron that we pray to. And then we'll go around the room and ask people how they're doing, rate themselves, say, to 1 to 5, 5 being having a tough time, 1 having a good week. And then we let the people that are having a tougher time go first and talk about how things are going. We actively encourage them to talk about their faith and where God is in the midst of this. And then we take a break for a little bit of socializing, and which is very important because so often people who live with these illnesses are isolated and they need this time to socialize with each other. And then we close with some sort of prayer. Either we say the rosary together, we might say the midday prayer from the office together, but we pray together at the end of the session. So it's good to have this place, a safe place where people can come talk about the intersection of their faith and mental illnesses. The other things we can do is home visits. So often people with these illnesses are isolated. They can't get to church because of their social anxiety disorder and other disorders, other problems. Home visits. Go visit your psychiatric facility and psychiatric units. Get comfortable doing that. It's fine. It's not scary to go to a psychiatric unit in a hospital. That's fine to go there and visit people. The healthcare professionals in the unit appreciate the visits from their faith community, and that's something you could get comfortable doing. Be aware, item 10 there, be aware of the resources in your community to help people to get to them as they may need them. Generally, people who live with an illness knows where all these resources are, but someone that's, child is just experiencing mental illness may need some help and guidance, or of course, someone new to the community would need some help and guidance on what the resources are. And then also item 11 here, keep it in front of the parish community. Part of what we do is educate the broader community about mental illness and mental health issues. So to have a mental health talk on the grounds of a parish, parish-sponsored event is very helpful to keep that in the attention, bring it to the attention of the broader parish community, and to realize that this is something you can talk about in the context of your faith. And then support other parish ministries. Your parish mental health ministry team can be the go-to people within the parish to get information and support on mental health issues. So you can maybe help your youth minister, or help the RCIA team, help other ministries within your parish to sort of weave this into the life of parish is something that the mental health ministry team can do to broaden out. And then the association will sponsor a web page if you need one. You can put the resources up there and other information that you can post about. You can get with me at the association. That's one of the things we offer to members is web pages for their parishes or dioceses to help support this and put the resources up there. Now, of course, many of you, of course, could do it through your existing web pages. But if that's not possible or it's a little too clunky, sometimes the IT departments can be difficult to deal with, we can fix you up with your own web page. So we'll be discussing more of these particular specific issues as we go on through the upcoming months. We'll be sending you some emails and newsletter updates on the topics of future and upcoming webinars, but the webinars will get into some of the more upcoming webinars will get into some of the more specific details of what it would take to implement a parish-based mental health ministry. So let me stop sharing here now, and we got just a couple minutes left, and see what type of questions you all have, and let me take a look here. Do any of you have any questions that you would like to bring up? Let's see here. Good resource you may want to review is Theology of Suffering and Disabilities. I can share that resource later on. The question is, are any of these resources for parish ministry available in Spanish? Some of them are. And I guess what we need to do on our webpage is start to have we get that question quite a bit, have a separate place where we highlight some of the Spanish resources. Sanctuary is available in Spanish. Our prayer cards are available in Spanish, and there's a good number of other resources. Mental health first aid is quite often offered in Spanish, so it's out there. We can do better, and those of you that are Spanish speakers, our association is relatively new, so it's we're always looking for help. So if you see things or the Spirit calls you to help us with translation, I certainly would encourage that. I see a priest here, a father mentioned that they did get some some mental health in their pastoral care course, which is good, and they can enroll in a clinical pastoral education unit. So yeah, a lot of this you can get through pastoral education, and that's good, and certainly would encourage anyone to do that sort of thing if the opportunity presents it. Let's see what some other comments are. I belonged to a parish that was very open to those with mental illness. There were some non-supportive people, but the pastor was supported. I was beginning hospital chaplain training. I understand it was so it revolves around being a chaplain in a mental health psychiatric unit. There are people that do this in Europe. There is mental health chaplains that are specifically trained, and the University of San Diego is developing through the Catholic Institute for Mental Health Ministry, is also developing a program for chaplains that are trained to go into psychiatric units. Because part of the issue is that the mental health care professionals need to be confident that we know what we're doing. When we go into these psychiatric units, they're worried, and maybe not without reason or without cause. They're worried that we might go in and do an exorcism or try to do some sort of something that would be outside the bounds of what would be appropriate within a psychiatric facility. So they like to see some better training for people that are going to be chaplains on a regular basis in these psychiatric units. So it's wonderful to see. I know the University of San Diego is doing this. I think I was reading McLean University at Harvard is developing a mental health chaplaincy program. So these things are all wonderful, and the ministry is developing. We're pretty much at the end of our time here. So I want to thank you all again for attending and listening to me go on about this for about an hour or so. And I would encourage you to, stay tuned. We'll be sending out additional emails, and we'll have a newsletter, and we're building up this ministry. And again, be patient with us. This ministry's only been around our association's been around about 2 years or so. So we're by no means have this down pat and have a program in place that you can just ride along that's been in place for like 20 years or something like that. It's very much a work in progress. But there's a wonderful, good people like you all that are joining in this ministry, and I'm confident. I know that the Holy Spirit's with us all as we build up this ministry, and is with you as you look at ways to build up the ministry within your parish community or within your diocese. So please pray to God for guidance. Please pray for myself and all of us that are active in this ministry right now, that we can be given the grace and guidance that we need to be the comfort that God can use us, as crooked and broken and disordered as we are, that God can work through us in some way to bring his healing presence into the lives of people that are living with a mental illness. So God bless you all, and hopefully I'll see you at another webinar in the future. Take care.